You know, with all the media that we have concerning humans dealing with anything alien, is humanity actually ready to deal with the consequences of a foreign organism invading our world? Could we coexist with anything that falls from the sky, and is there any real reason to think it wouldn't be as aggressive or expansive as our own species has been in the past? The reality is likely not. While we allegedly have entered a more enlightened time as of late where there's still war, but there isn't like world wars, so there's a considerable amount less of it, it's important to remember that while our species struggles against the ethical questions, it's only because our brains are designed as is with the highly social streak throughout that allows us to consider others, even if only for a second. Other species may not have the same drive or even the same consideration. To them, if another race is able to be decimated, then why not just do it? They may even think that they're doing us a favor, simply saving us from a slow death of resource depletion. In the events of save yourself, this idea is put to the test. As an unknown species touches down on Earth, they rapidly overwhelm the cities and towns that humanity has. As the couple had already went deep into the woods to reconnect, they're absolutely unaware of the war taking place all around them until it's right on their doorstep. But the question remains, what are these creatures? Where do they come from? Why are the way that they are? And what does the ending even mean? Let's discuss all that in today's episode covering Save Yourself. But first, this episode is sponsored by Factor. If you've watched this channel for long enough, then you know I've lost like 30 pounds with Factor. With their fresh, never frozen, delicious meals, coupled with the fact that I could do the double protein route and still remain in a calorie deficit, this allowed me to build muscle and strength and lose fat, which, if you don't know, is incredibly difficult to do, but Factor made it that much easier. Double protein not your thing? With their 60 add-ons like breakfast, on-the-go lunch, snacks, and beverages, keto, calorie smart, vegetarian, and vegan, there really is something for everyone. I also like to do the protein shake option, as sometimes I just want to grab a pre-made bottle of protein and just snack on that, and that way I also know I'm getting an adequate amount of protein out of my meal. So if you want to enter your winter arc, as the youth say, then by going to factor75.com or clicking the link below and using code 50Roanoke, you'll get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. That's 50 Roanoke at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. But before moving on, I want to thank you guys for watching. Without you, as always, I'm totally screwed. I have memberships and we'll start live streaming on the channel soon with it. The reason is it separates it out of the algorithm so that it does not screw up my main content to do so. If you want to check that out, dope. If not, don't sweat it. Check out Roanoke Tales for cryptids and true crime stuff. I'm streaming on Twitch under Roanoke Games. Keep an eye on the Discord for movies that we watch that end up here. Links for everything in the description. We kick off our story in space, which is usually how it starts with alien movies. Technically, we are in space right now if you think about it. High times aside, someone talks on the radio about falling for something. It's the year humankind lost planet Earth. That totally sucks. A couple is on the couch just straight up vibing, if you can call it that, as the woman then opens up her laptop. Her internet tabs are gone, which as we all know is fairly egregious. You know, you could just open up your history and then reopen the tabs, but this is her job to have tabs open, as then he heads into the kitchen. In their conversation, they keep looking at their phones and computers and cannot seem to carry out the actual conclusion of this discussion. Now, I don't know how true it is, but dopamine addiction due to these things is the highest it's ever been, and I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like I'm not playing Whiteout Survival religiously at night, as they got me. But every once in a while, maybe go for a walk without your phone outdoors in nature if you can just, listen to it. You may think it's silly, but it's actually really good for your skull meat to hear those noises rather than just be indoors all the time. Also, that wasn't even an ad. I just play that game. Also, I do play Raid Shadow Legends. It's a real thing. So they go to smash as one does, seeing as you have a girlfriend, which that kind of happens, as Jack gets a text from his job as she grabs her phone and starts scrolling on Facebook. Forgetting what they were just doing, they are right back at the doom scrolling. Save yourselves from this technological hell. At a party, it's all dyed eyebrows and nose rings. Hell of a party. At the bar top, Glasses has a conversation with another guy about Stegosaurus, which is pretty on brand for any party, as Miss Doom and Gloom then talks about how all of their lives are insignificant. Pretty on brand for any party. The group then talks about how they are headed to Mexico to have a low carbon footprint wedding, as Jack then looks over and spots some dude named Raph. He then talks to them about volcanoes and how the waves are created in the ocean next to it. Basically, his entire shtick is he's like a deep dude in touch with nature. And he's prototyping a 3D printed surfboard as a result for some reason. Once upon a time, he was an investment banker, the lost decade as he calls it, and then he just quit. He was full of slow burning rage and he just had to get out. Aren't we all? This part is actually pretty real. If you feel like you are completely and wholly unsatisfied with what you were doing, do something else. You only get so many rides around the sun, and those go by pretty quickly. So as they keep talking, he mentions that he's been upstate restoring his grandfather's cabin, as then he offers them to go there and enjoy it. Handing Jack a crystal, it's evidently a stress crystal. And if you're stressed, you squeeze the crystal because then your chakras or something will align. I don't know. That seems ridiculous. Anyways, on the walk home, Jack then talks about starting a community garden. He wants to do something with his life, sort of like what Raph is doing, but he's got absolutely no direction in which way to go. So as Sue and Jack then walk home hammered, they sit eating junk food the next day. Can absolutely relate. The hangovers just get more and more brutal, that's for sure. Having a sudden moment of clarity, Sue then looks over at Jack and smacks the phone out of his hand. Realizing they are letting life pass one day at a time, doing the same thing over and over again, Jack then calls in saying that they are disconnecting from work and reconnecting with one another at the cabin. Sue then calls in asking her boss pretty much for a vacation, saying that she hopes that's fine, as then she gets a text saying that she's fired for taking time off work. What in the name of all that is holy? I mean, I have no idea what her work ethic is in work. Maybe she takes off all the time, or there's always some sort of, issue that pops up. But if you're at a job that instantly fires you for taking time for yourself, tell them to pound sand because, yeah, no thanks. So Sue then says this is good because seriously, if you got fired for taking vacation, which is illegal to do because you're required to be able to take vacation, screw that job. Later that night, they then go to sleep talking about how great it's going to be to go to the cabin. They get the soap set up as then they get ready to head out. Shutting off the lights, the cabin trip begins. Sue then talks about how her mom is going to freak out about the job as then they set their voicemails to something really lame with both of them talking. And it also says when they will be back and that they are going offline. So as they begin their drive off, something appears in the sky above heading down onto Earth.
The sky is falling.
That's a lot of whatever those are. And we will find out what those are later. Getting to the cabin, not a bad looking place. Heading inside, Jack then calls out to Alexa and Google, and then nothing answers. Annoying, mainly because my Alexa did answer, however, and I had to tell her several times to stop playing Whitney Houston. Laying on the bed for a minute, they get up to go for a hike out in nature. Checking on the ants, they are moving their colony. Sue then talks about how blissfully unaware they are that there are two giant humans right next to them, and that their entire existence could be taken out at any second. Ooh, foreshadowing. Not just that, because she wouldn't do it, but, it could happen. So as they sit there, they then hear shots fire off in distance as something is going on, but they're separated by a fair amount of distance from it because that's on another mountain. Jack and Sue then leave out to go to build a fire somewhere, as Sue then says she wants to try something this week, which depending on how it's said, could be a good thing or a bad thing. Handing him a book, she then wrote down a bunch of stuff on it, which is a list that she got from the internet. That's not disconnecting, that's just the paper internet. Hearing more shots, there's a lot of hunting going on, don't you think? That night back at the cabin, they grab the firewood to go build a fire, almost getting it. I think you need some kindling there, brother. The logs themselves will not start without it unless you've got a lot of time. Instead, Jack tells Sue that the wood must be bad, so there's nothing he can do for that. Okay, so the frogs then start croaking as they smoke the devil's lettuce. They see a shooting star as several can be seen all over, which made me think about the time that, Shaggy and Fred in that really weird cartoon short or whatever are smoking the devil's lettuce, looking up at the sky. It's very strange. Anyways, like I said, these shooting stars can be seen all over, which is fairly interesting as this suggests something a little more is happening. So looking up, they then talk about how to humanely trap a rabbit. Seeing one streak across the sky, it appears as though it did hit Earth, making it a meteorite because it has the right stuff to make it through the atmosphere. She then tells Jack to slow down on the jack as then they head to bed. Hearing a high-pitched noise, Jack then wakes up screaming at something as he tells Sue he's not Spider-Man and then goes back to bed. The next day, someone is booging it through the forest as noises can be heard. Back at the cabin, they carry a canoe towards the pond as then they get in and stare at each other. She says now they will close their eyes and just feel each other, so Jack starts feeling her up. As the guy in the background then comes running up, their eyes are closed. The guy gets yeeted as then they open their eyes and they are now calm. They then talk about their gifts as the internet has told her what to say. Jack then says she needs to learn to relax as he jumps into the water. Going to go bake a loaf of bread and eat it, she then jumps in after him carrying her list as then they head into the cabin once more. As Jack looks down, there's this poof thing on the ground and neither of them noticed it before, but they elect to just kind of keep ignoring it because it's not an issue. And, you wouldn't say it's an issue per se, but it's definitely something worth watching. So as they keep talking, Sue then asks what his gifts are. He apparently has no gifts or talents, or in this case, apparently sheer skills. So instead, taking a shower, she says, She needs more from him, as now she asks, what is he really afraid of? She says she wants to achieve something this week. Also, if you weren't aware, when you go defunct for long enough with your partner, part of the whole reconnection thing is the reconnection fight. Those are hilarious and also extremely annoying. Maybe that doesn't happen to everyone, but I've seen it happen a lot, not just in my own relationships, but other people's as well. She then asks what he's doing at 34, because at 30, her mother had 3 kids. This upsets Jack, as then he leaves, electing to go grab the healing crystal as he heads downstairs to chop some wood, but the Poof thing is now gone. So now we can establish the Poof creature is in fact the alien. But what is it doing exactly? Something to understand about these things is evidently they have different personalities. Like a bunch of murderous Care Bears, they each have, like, they're gonna behave differently depending on the luck of the draw, at least for you. It's not really luck of the draw for them. That said, these creatures are there to take over the planet and do away with humanity, so it seems. However, some appear more inquisitive than others and also less aggressive as a result. And depending on who you ask, we will see evidence for this later. So setting up the wood, Sue then heads downstairs to watch him chop wood, Amityville Horror style. Like, okay, remember the remake with Ryan Reynolds chopping a concerning amount of wood shirtless the entire movie? That was what pushed the plot forward, I think. So as Sue then looks around, she goes into her purse and grabs her phone because it's easier to get that dopamine hit. And as she starts checking her voicemail, she hears that they are attracted to Ethanol, as her mom calls her, telling her the rats are not rats. Jack comes in, saying let's do this, as she quickly hides her phone. He says he wants to do the list, as then he adds they should be productive this week. Wow, chopping wood actually led to a healthy turnaround. Actually, one of the healthier things you can do when mad is allow for your nervous system about 20 minutes to calm down, because remember, you are made of meat, fat, and electricity. When you get upset, your body is primed to fight, which means you are flooded with hormones. The problem is when someone you care about has caused it, or you're reacting to something they did that caused it, you have to give time for your body to physically remove those chemicals and hormones from its operation. 20 minutes allows for this, so you can come back calmer. It is literally the time required for your nervous system to chill out. So Jack says he doesn't know how to be a man. Ah, well, yes, that seems somewhat apparent. Although there are different flavors of being a man, brother. There is no one way forward. He says, though, he is hidden behind this idea of the modern man. He hates the sound of his voice because it sounds pathetic. Easily remedied: lift some weights, eat some steak, drink some water, and completely remove any extracurricular visual stimulation from your diet that's not your partner. And a lot of people get upset when I say that, but no, there's brain scans that prove it's not good for your brain. So if you're on the fence about not looking at that stuff on the internet, you should probably just go ahead and not do it. So he asks her to make a confession. Also, somebody's gonna refute those brain scans. No, they've done it several times, not just from one study. So get good, take the L, stop looking at prawn. So she says she can't think of anything right now, as then he asks her what is the last thing she wasn't honest about, as she says she eats her contacts. I actually had a girlfriend who would put her contacts in her mouth at night for some reason. I asked her about it and she's like, oh, it's just something I've always done. Anyways, 2015 vision here, which allegedly is better than 2020. I cannot relate. So disturbing Roanoke lore revelations aside, something then hits the window as Sue says it was a critter and it just ran into it. Assuming it was a hedgehog of sorts, they famously jump and hit windows all the time like Sonic. So they run to the window here and they lose sight of it, as Sue then says she's sure it's fine. That night they play cards together, drinking wine and whiskey, as Jack says they should just move out of New York. He talks about moving upstate, and in a year maybe they can start thinking about having kids and or younglings. We're gonna see which one gets me hit. Handing her the cards, she then talks about how they always talk about the future but never do it, while outside someone stands there looking at them inside with a wounded head. Behind him the Poof ball, and then dropping down, it's apparent the creature has now dropped 2 people. So a rather interesting turn of events, because this is the same Poof ball that both Jack and Sue have seen several times at this point, and yet it has made no attempt to attack them. Instead, it took out the guy originally who was running through the woods, who may have actually warned them, and now it took out another interloper who would have very likely told them what was going on. Interestingly, the Poof appears to be studying them somewhat, and anyone who gets close, it then takes them out. But the question is, why? And I think I have somewhat of an idea as to why this is the case. It can be good, but it can also be pretty bad. It just depends on your version of, do you think Soylent Green is good or bad? So sleeping at night, the whirring noise can be heard once more as Jack then wakes up yelling at something. The Poof ball is back and it is in their room watching them. The next day, man, drinking 2 days in a row in your 30s, that third day is rough. Heading downstairs, Jack then finds his sourdough flour is all gone. Jack then starts wondering if there are raccoons around as he realizes the whiskey is all gone too. Finding some goo on the bottle, that's pretty gross. It's the same goo that was on the flour jar as well. A hole has been punched through. Evidently there is ethanol in sourdough and the whiskey, as Sue then sees that the Poof has moved. Sue says not to touch that thing, as then they talk about what it is, as they don't even know where to begin. So grabbing the log grabber, it moves. A string of flesh moves out as it leaves out of the cabin, not wanting to engage. Clearly, if this creature wanted to do so, it could absolutely drop them right there, but for some reason, it does not. Either it has gotten attached to the subjects after studying them for so long, or quite possibly, it has observed long enough to understand that they are non-aggressive and only pushed into aggression if enough danger is presented. So by leaving, it shows the Poof creature also they're really not just mindless aliens hell-bent on destruction, but they are there to observe. Confused as to what the hell that thing was just in their room with them, Sue then runs upstairs and locks all the windows. Sue then spills the spaghetti out of her pocket about how she turned on her phone and her mom told her about the rats. Only they aren't rats. Jack is concerned about her lying to him instead of like the alien creature that they just saw that is clearly invading Earth, as Sue's mom was telling her about the rats were taking over the city. She says they were attracted to the ethanol. Sue then says they need to turn on their phones and then see what's going on. Heading back downstairs with a toilet plunger and a toilet seat top, Sue grabs her purse as both of them head upstairs and shut the door. Turning on their phones, Sue has 3 voicemails and a bunch of texts as they don't have any signal for their phone as that is long gone. Jack is upset as if she had told him yesterday, he would have messages too. Brooklyn is screwed and everyone is assembling at Yankee Stadium, which in the next text says don't go there, it's destroyed. Some dude named Julian had died due to the creatures, as then they listen to the voicemail from Sue's mom. Each voicemail gets a little more concerning about the rats and how it's some sort of alien. Sue then laments not calling her mom back as they check on the other voicemails. One is from Raph and one is from Jack's mom. Raph says stuff is getting pretty weird in New York, so he's gonna be coming up to the cabin. Jack's mom called to let him know they could pick him up at any port as long as they call within the next hour. Raph then left another message saying the force multiplier is in the basement and that they should use it. So they argue about how they could have been on a boat by now, but they're really just stuck at Raph's cabin. I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do. So realizing they need to work together in order to make this work, they stop arguing and chill out for a second. Sue then says they should go into town and try to get cell service and then try to call Jack's parents. Running outside, they get into the car as the engine will not turn over. It is out of gas because ethanol. That's in a lot of gas nowadays. So these Poofs then drink the ethanol, but interestingly, they can also drink straight up gasoline. And while this is not going to be the standard of their diet, it does not bode well for gas-burning vehicles, seeing as 10% has pretty much been added to all of them, which is just pure ethanol. However, interestingly, this would leave diesel vehicles completely viable. Turning on the radio, they are told to take shelter and stay in place. Finding the same hole in the car that was on the bottle, they realize the aliens drank the gas. Heading back inside, their only option is to just stay there. They had 3 days worth of food, which means time to start rationing. Jack then says he's not adding a force multiplier to the situation, which, why not? It's a tool like anything else. And this is why it's important to train with any tool that you might need. Having no choice as they need to find a way to defend themselves, they become force multiplier people. Pulling the box out of the basement, they try to figure out what year was it that penicillin was actually discovered, as that's the code to get in the box. They keep getting 1870 from somewhere or 1970, but really penicillin was discovered in 1928 by bacteriologist Alexander Fleming, working in St. Mary's Hospital in London. Actually, interestingly, realizing that penicillin had uses to kill bacteria, the whole game would change in February of 1941 when Oxford policemen had an extremely serious infection that resulted in abscesses located throughout his entire body. By administering the penicillin to him, his condition improved so much within 24 hours, it was labeled as startling. Unfortunately though, they only kind of purified a very small amount, which resulted in him dying just a few weeks later because he could not fully be treated. But it should be understood that this would kind of highlight that antibiotics were the future. And now we're kind of having issues with them because everybody has overused them. Old doctors prescribed it for everything, even viral infections. So now there's a ton of bacteria that is just completely immune to our antibiotics. Joy abound. Gonorrhea is almost incurable. So be smart out there. Anyhow, back to the movie. So, seeing as they can't get into the box, they keep trying or just go outside, get the axe, and break the lock. They then talk about how there's not anything that they do know, so they decide to steer towards what do they know. So they know that aliens are on Earth, they look like footstools, and New York has been evacuated. They can't talk in terms of wants because those are Earth-based behaviors. Jack then says they should start nowhere, as he adds there's more weapony stuff in the basement. That's probably what you should call it. Heading into the basement, well, this all looks terrible. Grabbing a broom handle, I suppose. Sue then keeps working on the lock while flies buzz around. Looking in the furnace, it has wood in it as she seems to realize there's something in there, I guess. Jack then keeps looking around the basement, freaking out as then he spots a basketball. Looking up into the furnace, Jack then scares Sue as she says she doesn't want to split up again. He says they should use the wine as a distraction, opening up the chest on the backside because the hinges aren't actually even attached. They then pull the force multiplier out to test it out. And this is quite literally the Jumanji scene where the kid goes to grab an axe to open up the shed to get the axe. Cinematic masterpiece. Firing a shot and then breaks the window, and now they are slightly deaf. You're telling me the famous method of a shirt tied around your head isn't going to completely stop that concussive wave? Blasphemy! Well, you're now 10% disabled. Congratulations. So covering up the window and eating some bread, Sue suggests that they go make some go bags, as she calls them. As all their food is perishable though, it's kind of a problem. Grabbing everything and throwing it in, they check their time of 23 seconds. That night they cover up the windows as they sit back to back trying to stay awake. They talk about if anyone is going to save them or if they will have to save themselves. Ha! You almost said it. So they talk about how they don't really have any skills, and that's the beauty of the human mind. You can always learn more, right up until you drop, actually, so there's no need to fret about that. They're both scared, as in they take shifts sleeping, or they're supposed to take shifts sleeping, but if you've never had to do that before, it is quite difficult. Totally messing up that plan, Jackie wakes up finding Raph is there, and he has one of those things on his head. Realizing the Poof has been studying them the whole time, it is on the couch. He's seeing Raph as then he's still sleepwalking somewhat as they head outside to run towards the barn. Now this scene, with it attached to his head, it could be that it's controlling him, but I just think he's kind of combining the fact that Raph was supposed to come up there mixed with the Poof, because there's really nothing to suggest that these things can control you through your brain at any level, really. So heading inside, they then hide in the back and they find a Land Rover back when Land Rovers were actually good. This is a 1971 Land Rover 88 series, a Federal Deluxe hardtop, some would say. These hilariously got the same gas mileage as my LX 450 at 13.4 miles per gallon, depending on what type of engine. Woefully underpowered with a 2.25 liter four-cylinder diesel engine is probably the bulk of the issue right there. It would put out only about 81 horsepower, and do you know how heavy Land Rovers are? But it could last as long as 250,000 miles if maintained properly. It was quite tolerant of poor fuel quality, and really it didn't care when it was serviced as far as oil changes, so this was the Toyota back in the day. Now they fall apart if you forget to change the cabin air filter for more than a week. There was a 6-cylinder option, but that thing, I mean, it was also equally underpowered, but I mean, I guess it could still deal with similar environments. They're not great, they would move. So they find the keys to it as there's no hole, meaning it may still have gas in it that could be extremely old, but it's not really old because diesel is known to last usually around like 6 to 12 months, whereas gas is really only known to last around like 3 to 6 months. Now, before the mob comes after me with that is just what is typically said. What happens is water evaporates, causing gas to turn into a varnish, whereas diesel is more stable. When this happens, at least with gas, it leaves behind a substance that, while flammable, is thicker and can clog up your fuel system. I know for a fact I have left several vehicles alone for up to 6 months before, and then fired them up and there wasn't an issue, but just know, all gas degrades. If you go back to the Last of Us TV show where they were siphoning 20-year-old gas out of vehicles, ain't happening. And I mean, really, there's also no telling how long that Land Rover was in there for, but who knows. So getting in and looking at their driving options, it's stick shift, as Sue says she was taught in college by her former boyfriend one time, but she's not that good. Well, congratulations. You've been promoted to driver. So starting it up, they then back out of there, as she seems to be doing a pretty good job to me. Slow, but they're still moving. They also left their go bags in the house with the scientist Poof. So devising a plan, Jack is going to grab the axe and Sue is going to grab the go bags at the entrance. Jack stops as the Poof is on the roof. It attaches to the Range Rover for a second, but it either can't get through the metal, but I think only in this late hour do we actually remember it doesn't like diesel. So while these creatures are capable of drinking gas containing ethanol, there is no ethanol in diesel. This actually does imply a lot about their level of intelligence though. This Poof in particular does not actually appear aggressive towards Jack and Sue for the most part. It has had several chances to take them out, like right now for instance, and we will also literally see this one do this with others as we've seen before, but I clearly think it's refraining from doing so with them. And this shows a level of sapience well beyond what could just be considered a standard animal. When we look at these creatures, obviously they are driven by the need to eat. Their own metabolisms crave ethanol to break down for energy, and this process is known to many already, especially me, but it would seem a similar metabolic pathway is taken by these creatures that is also taken by humanity. Ethanol is broken down by our livers, where alcohol dehydrogenase metabolizes it into acetaldehyde, which is then broken further down into acetate. In this process, energy is released, so you do actually gain some benefit from alcohol, but believe me, the cons definitely outweigh the pros. That said, again, I drink alcohol. I love beer and wine. Liquor sucker punches me, so I'm starting to kind of try to steer away from that for the most part. Anyhow, a large problem is alcohol also comes back as formaldehyde in your system, which is not great to have circulating in your body, and you pee out a lot of vitamins when you drink it, as well as water, and this leads to a hangover. So this creature very likely does have its own biochemistry regarding alcohol as a toxin, which means it doesn't. Therefore, it's likely that there are other enzymes in place to further break it down concerning the more dangerous leftover components, meaning that alcohol does not act likely as a diuretic to them. Instead, they're able to break it down for energy and nutrition like we do with food, and as a result of that, they maintain their own vitamins and minerals and never really get that hangover. Instead, they just have a viable form of nutrition that runs their bodies. Now, this does hint at their own background concerning their home planet, and this all is speculative, but when we look at these creatures, interestingly, they are covered in hair like mammals of this planet, and because of this, we can assume on their come up, so to speak, it may have been a colder climate on their planet, and this may help to explain the ethanol consumption. While not advised on Earth, ethanol can prevent freezing of plants and many other things. It's important to remember that ethanol is derived from yeast fermenting things like fruits, but ethanol itself works as an excellent antifreeze. It works pretty well to prevent fuel from freezing in your gas tank, also, which is like why in Alaska, for instance, they have to leave their diesel engines running for large amounts of time when it gets cold, as opposed to their gas tanks. I've actually watched quite a few episodes of this guy who has like a house on the back of his truck. I think it's called Truck House Life. I think that's his channel. He has a diesel truck, which apparently has like lots of problems, but he's up in Alaska and he actually leaves that thing running for days at a time just so the diesel doesn't freeze up. Anyhow, so evolutionarily speaking, I believe the species has evolved to consume ethanol from the sources around it. They may be on a colder planet with plants and animals having higher levels of ethanol in their body, basically to the point that it's become a source of nutrition. But how is it extracted? Well, we will see that momentarily, and then we'll talk about it because just know, since like it went after the diesel, but it didn't drink it, it was not going after it because it was attracted to the ethanol in the diesel. It was likely going after it as it knows, typically, just from what it's seen, with vehicles, there is ethanol in the gas. Also, it should be noted, they're adding ethanol to some diesel fuels, but in this case, it was not in the fuel. So jumping back in, Sue slowly reverses out of there as then they run over something. Taking off, they don't see anything, but they did definitely run over someone. It appears they took out Raph, who did make it to the cabin only to be got by the scientist Poof. Driving through the trail, Sue slept in her contacts, which are bothering her as they still have no service. Seeing someone come down the road, pulling up in an absolutely sweet first gen Tundra 4x4. A woman then gets out and fires at the Poof as then she gets stabbed through the chest. The guy comes around next and then just gets stabbed through the head. The Poof then approaches as Jack throws a wine bottle as the Poof levitates. It then sends out something at them before heading off to go get the wine. I do not believe maybe this is the same Poof given its different attitude when dealing with them. However, it is attracted to the high ethanol source. Now, I don't know what that was concerning the cloud, but I'm going to definitely figure it out, as then they get hit with a smell, but we'll kind of talk about the effects here shortly. Heading through, they then hear a baby start crying, which is not ideal. Can't just leave them behind. Jack says under normal circumstances, he would help, but right now, they should just be full-blown selfish. Getting out, they check the window. It is a baby. Running around to the side, a woman was hiding in the back as she gets out and grabs the force multiplier on them and then asks if it's a diesel, so she's good to go. Stealing their car, Sue then yells about, "What about the baby?" as she says, "It's not mine, so I don't care." Slowly reversing out of there, she takes off as now they are screwed. I suppose you could just go find some gas and maybe come back for the Tundra. put some non-ethanol in it. Those do exist. I mean, it's not going to be as reliable as a Tacoma, but it is pretty close. There will be Tundra purists who will disagree. It's actually true, though. The first-gen Tacoma is more reliable than the first-gen Tundra, probably due to having less moving parts. So attaching the baby to the baby wearer, Sue then says she has left her birth control behind, so if they don't get rescued within 3 days, she's going to start her cycle. Checking his birth certificate, his name is also Jack. As they laugh, baby Jack then shat himself. Welcome to stage 1 parenthood. Throwing the diaper, they begin hearing a noise as Sue then starts getting tired. Jack completes the task as Sue is cave womaning over there, behaving a little strangely. It's evident they are both a little high at this point, but the question is, on what? They're completely tripping as baby Jack then starts crawling away. In front of the reverend tree, they get married as they agree to never lie when it pertains to aliens. They realize at this point that they are tripping hardcore, as then she goes into the bag and grabs the epinephrine, which may have been a bit overzealous, stabbing both of them. They then pass out as the Poof is moving through the forest. So 2 things. First, what do they get hit with, and what does epinephrine do? So given that these creatures actually take in ethanol as a main fuel source for their bodies, I believe they just got hit with a mixture of fumes internal to the Poof, but also a considerable amount of ethanol fumes. The short-term effects of these fumes can cause eyes, skin, and nose, as well as your throat and lung irritation, leading to coughing, which is what they did when they were in the car, but later, this can actually lead to drowsiness, vomiting, and unconsciousness. The reason is you are essentially inhaling alcohol, so it gets to the brain much faster, and this can lead to brain damage to a degree, which drinking itself leads to brain damage, so don't do it, but just know everything leads to brain damage. But essentially, you just get really drunk really fast. Do not use that information for anything apart from understanding the dangers of it. It does not raise your blood alcohol levels that much, but it is considerably stronger. Now, understanding this, Sue assumes it to be an issue of some other toxin. Injecting themselves with epinephrine, they still pass out due to the ethanol fumes. Epinephrine itself is something that your body naturally produces, which is known as adrenaline. Also, norepinephrine's in there, but it does have medical applications. It causes the heart to pump harder and faster due to a threat inducing fight or flight. The lungs and airways then open up further, allowing for you to breathe more deeply and at an elevated rate. Your pupils will dilate and your skin has the blood diverted away from it towards the organs, which is great because if you get a cut, you won't bleed as much, and the muscles have increased blood flow to allow for better fueling. When you take it, it does all of this simultaneously, which can counteract the allergy or histamine pathways, causing airways to constrict, so it then opens them up. This is also known in the short term that epinephrine can actually help reduce ethanol levels in the blood due to the heart pumping faster, removing it more quickly. But long term, it really won't work that much. So after injecting themselves, their bodies would still undergo the physiological responses associated with having epinephrine coursing through their veins, but they would be unconscious. So before too much longer, their bodies would remove enough of the ethanol to regain that consciousness. Waking up sometime later, Jack then gets the dirt out of his mouth because he was eating that for some reason, as he realizes baby Jack is gone and the Poof has poofed them. Sue also lost her contact, so she can't see through one eye, but then they assume baby Jack couldn't have gotten very far, so they stop talking to see if they can hear him listening through the forest. So hearing nothing, Sue then says they're going to die out here, so again, they just focus on finding the baby instead of their impending doom. And hearing something, they find him not too far away, but the Poof is between them and the baby, and I'm assuming this to be the scientist one. They have no idea if it's looking at them or the baby, so running back for the knife, the Poof now approaches as Jack asks for the wine. Throwing it, they have already indicated that they are aggressive, so the Poof then stabs Jack in the baby carrier, and as it tries to suck out his blood, I guess, it looks like he uses the crystal to just start stabbing it as Sue then cuts off the appendage and it bleeds a blackish color. Having neutered it, it then deflates rapidly as this evidently kills it. Jack's phone prevented the Poof from breaking through into his thoracic cavity. As Sue is jazzed, Jack stepped between her and the Poof, but she savagely murdered it while it was attacking him, so everything worked out and they're very happy with each other. So they are still chock full of epinephrine right now. Being close to the trail, they discuss what even is epinephrine. So here we see how the creature hunts more fully, using an appendage that may work similarly to like a pistol shrimp with a biological catch that then stores up potential energy and then is turned into kinetic energy. The Poof will fire this appendage tipped with a needle-like tip that can then suck out the blood if necessary. It is strong enough to pierce glass and metal, and it will then basically suck out anything on the other end. It's clear this creature is naturally predatory, so on its home planet, given that it may be colder, or there may actually be other creatures like itself, there appears to be a significant amount of ethanol in its prey. This once again suggests possibly its home is a lot colder given the complete covering of fur that it has, and the ethanol in its own body preventing freezing issues. Its entire body appears to be supported by blood and an internal pressurization of ethanol fumes, giving it a more rounded appearance. It seems these fumes are added to based on at least what it drinks. So when cutting its appendage, the blood is black, which we know if you spray blood with ethanol, it typically turns it very, very brown or black. So it may be that the blood it drank from humans combined with its own ethanol levels actually turns it into this blackish coloring. Ultimately though, it may still breathe oxygen on its world, it just needs ethanol to run its metabolism, sort of like how we breathe oxygen, maybe on its world, and we would still need to eat meat and plants in order for our metabolism to run. Although if everything has a level of ethanol in it, in order to not freeze, we would be drunk the whole time that we were there. I also want to mention that the levitating in fumes that it produces means these creatures are extremely light and they're able to expel ethanol fumes, allowing themselves to gain height, but also use it as a defense mechanism against humans, and it may actually work sort of like a squid inking the water. They can fire ethanol off in another direction to prevent another species from attacking them. Granted, these creatures need ethanol, so they don't want to get rid of all of it. So giving Jack and Sue ethanol, who were drinking it as well, may have confused the creature into thinking maybe they needed ethanol too. So it may have actually just been sharing. See, that's the issue with interspecies communication. Where do you even begin? Let's say you try to shake the hand of an alien's hand, right? In our culture, it's just seen as a greeting, right? That means I have no weapon in my hand, I'm shaking your hand. But in their culture, it could be a sign of aggression. You are thrusting a part of your body that could be used to attack them. This is actually a question that is asked quite a bit. If ever we do come across aliens, how are we really going to do it? But there could be an issue of miscommunication that seems aggressive, but in reality, it was meant to be a gesture of peace. And they may do the same thing. Maybe aliens just revive after being stabbed through the chest, and humans don't. So it's like, oh, we were stabbing you in the chest saying hello. Anyway, so continuing their hike, they then find the lookout spot that they were just previously at as they look across the mountains. Heading off to baby, let's go. They feed him and talk about how they were just there 3 days ago. Seeing a thing in the woods, they have no idea what that is, and walking over to it, it's some sort of crystalline structure. Touching it, alien technology is probably a good idea. It reacts to her hand as she says she can't actually touch it. There's a force field around it. Jack then approaches it, also trying to touch it, as it keeps going down into the ground. Their phones then start ringing as Jack's phone won't work as it's totally busted. They got a lot of text messages just out of nowhere as then they go to the news. Around them, a barrier begins to build up. All over, everyone is having issues as they realize that they are contained within a bubble too late. Calling for help, nobody can really hear them as they are stuck. They got stuck in a poof trap. Calling 911, they can't answer due to the high call volume, and then they are transported up above the trees, and then high into the sky. Well, this would be horrifying. Looking out, they are above the helicopters as a nuke goes off in the distance, getting dropped into different areas. You don't want to look directly at that. Moving above the clouds, they continue their ascent as then they are all having trouble breathing. That thing isn't pressurized. However, oxygen then starts flowing in as they start heading out into space. Hundreds of other pods are also ascending as well, as then they ask if they were saved. Looking down, they float off into space with everyone else, and that seriously cannot be a good thing. But thus concludes, save yourselves. So ultimately, what does this mean exactly? Well, given that the Poofs appear to have only really been aggressive to those that were aggressive, which would be natural for most humans after witnessing these things, and not to mention the very clear differences in personality, the Poofs seem to have been sent as maybe a recon force to get an idea of what our species is. In this case, Homo sapiens, upon landing, humanity would have acted aggressively, so many were regarded as just simply aggressive. It's sort of like a feral cat, right? Sometimes you get a friendly one, but most times you don't. Jack and Sue are mostly a friendly feral cat, but then the same idea applies. Feral cats are only scared because they don't understand that if you scoop them, they could have a better life indoors with food and shelter. But then again, is that freedom? If this alien species came down with a similar idea, it may be that they are looking for humans who are a bit more docile. Obviously, a lot of humans are going to be steering kind of towards fighting, as being conquered by an alien poof species is just embarrassing. Even nukes were going off at the end, but it's clear many humans ended up in these crystalline structures, and the whole point was complete extermination. Why pull any humans off the planet and then give them oxygen in the pod as it ascends? That is pretty clear, or at least a pretty clear-cut example of wanting to keep them alive. It appears to me that for one reason or another, the original alien species came in to study certain humans, and when coming across the more docile form of humans, they would observe them for a while, then begin herding them towards a general location. Once there, the crystals would then take them up into the sky. However, the one watching Jack and Sue would ultimately be taken out by them. Those that were left behind would have to contend with the invading force on the ground that evidently cutting off the appendage seems to take them off, but firing lead into them doesn't, which is a bit strange. So now where do we go from here? It may be just that, sort of like a feral cat scenario. The freedom of Earth is gone, but the security of another species is achieved, possibly. It could be like a zoo scenario, taking humans away to some other area where we will now live to be 500 years old, but we will be contained. Humans left on Earth may still survive if, the force of the Poofs leave, but considering the beginning then talks about how humanity lost Earth, it appears to be an occupying force, and it could be for the simple fact that humans are violent, and in order to not lose a planet that supports life, humanity has to be subdued until our species ages a bit more, because right now we are like a toddler with a hand grenade. But all in all, these things really don't seem that hard to take out, and where those who entered the pods go may not be all that better, but ultimately it could just be some humans are rescued or saved, as they put it, because they were more docile, and all the humans that are left on Earth will be exterminated. But anyhow, I want to hear what you guys think. Do you think Jack and Sue are actually saved, or once again, is this a Soylent Green issue and it's made out of people? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be great of you, as it helps get the video out there, and subscribing is also baller. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Tales, and Games link in the description. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, I'd like to thank our astronauts, Army and Tristan Kessick. Thank you guys for your awesome support. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicists, Death Dancer and Feather. Thank you guys as well. And my scientists, Dakota23, Invictus Echo, Metric System, Official Texan, Stutz, and the victorious return of Chad the Enjoyer of scientific explanations of B-grade horror movies. I do appreciate y'all's support as well. And the rest of my patrons, you guys are also awesome. Keeps everything running smoothly and the lights on around here, so it is greatly appreciated. All right, so that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.